recently about jail and treatment for users. You get 80-20 splits on what's the most appropriate way to deal with a drug user, jail or treatment. Asset forfeiture. People go bonkers when they find out that it exists. Everyone understands that marijuana is a soft drug in their minds, not the equivalent of heroin and cocaine. So all these are leverage points. But underneath all of that, why is it that if they agree with this, if they think the policy is inevitable, well, they're afraid. The other side has sold them on the equation of drugs and crime, or drugs and violence. And nobody wants to shake up the status quo, take a chance on doing something different, unless they're fairly secure in knowing that that choice is going to lead to safety, and they don't feel that way about drugs. So that's where we have to educate them. That's one of the critical things. How do we do that at the tactical level? Well, we all know what that you do press work, you do demonstrations, you do community organizing, you do research, you do scientific research, policy research, lobbying, and also initiatives. We're going to do 5 initiatives, beyond 2 on medical marijuana and 5 more this year, several on ending civil asset forfeiture, and several on substituting treatment for incarceration for all drug users, not just marijuana users. Each one of these initiatives has been crafted by public opinion polling and focus group research, so that we know exactly how far people are willing to go. What arguments will work to support our position? What arguments will work to attack our position? How we can counter those in each of these 5 states. And in each state, it's a different initiative, and it was a different process, local research process that led to it. Now, chances are very good we're going to win all these initiatives. And on top of 2 other medical marijuana initiatives, hopefully in November, we're going to have 7 victories. And we think it's very important to project that kind of we win every time on this issue, because that puts increasing pressure on the federal government. That's what got Al Gore to talk about medical marijuana when Dick and his friends put it to him in New Hampshire. So, that leads me to an unpleasant conclusion. What is the impact of another kind of initiative that didn't go through this process and that is going to lose overwhelmingly in November on the same day that all these carefully crafted initiatives win? And I'm unfortunately referring to an initiative that Jack's going to talk about in a couple minutes. It's on the ballot in Alaska. That initiative is not strategic, because that initiative can't possibly win based on public opinion polling that's been available there for some time. So what's going to happen? The government's going to say, well, people are split on drug reform. You know, they might want a few initiatives over here, but then they lost that other one up there. And if we continue to put initiatives on the ballot that are unpopular and lose, if we continue to have demonstrations like the one that occurs in Boston Commons every year, in which 50 to 70,000 people get together and smoke dope in a public park, and everybody else in Massachusetts who might be thinking about coming over to our side on an initiative vote that will occur 6 weeks after the next demonstration thinks to themselves, well, this is just a bunch of junkies in the park. That's not going to help any of us get to a goal as fast as we want to get to it. So I'm going to take the position here, and I know a lot of people will want to ask questions about this later, that the fastest way to get, that we can get to where we're going is as fast as the American people are willing to go there with us. And then if we try to get too far out ahead of people, we lose our connection to them and our relation to them and our credibility, and we make it more difficult to move them to where we want to go, because that's the only way we're going to get to where we want to go. Thank you.
We're going to hear now from Robert Lundy. Robert has been an activist in cannabis reform movement in the state of Washington for many years. He's been involved with several initiatives up there. He is currently involved with a campaign to regulate and tax marijuana or cannabis, which is it you're taxing?
Marijuana.
Marijuana. I always like to think of marijuana prohibition as the past and cannabis legalization as the future, but that's all right. It's a very interesting prospect they're facing up there right now, and I'm sure he'll tell you about it. Robert Lundy.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I have been an activist in Washington State for many years, working on the grassroots level, in particular working on volunteer initiative drives to tax and regulate marijuana. And once again, I find myself involved, spending many, many hours on such a project. But this time it's a little bit different. I'm here as a representative of our organization, the Campaign to Tax and Regulate Marijuana, so I want to mention the other 3 board members who have been spending equally a lot of time on this issue. That's Jeff Haley, who's a director of the Drug Policy Foundation in Washington, and he's worked very closely with the I-685 campaign and 692 campaign in the past. Tom Rohan, who you may remember as the director of the Hemp Initiative Projects of Washington State, and if you know Tom, you know that he is dedicated to the tax and regulate strategy. And there's myself, who worked with Tom on that issue. I'm also operate hemp.net and have tried to organize activists in Washington State that way. And the 4th member of our board is Bruce McKinney, who is relatively new to the movement. He's been dubbed by our Washington media, of course, as our Microsoft millionaire, to finance this initiative drive. Bruce, as well as the other 3 of us, are very dedicated to the concept of tax and regulate, and this is the general philosophy. And I think what our board is going through is very similar to what everybody else has gone through as they've grown in this movement. The belief is that if we don't deal with the black market, if we don't deal with the problem, if you say somebody can possess marijuana, but you don't say how they're going to get marijuana, and you don't deal with the sellers and the growers, you're not making any progress, and any initiative that does less than that is frankly a distasteful alternative. In some ways it feels like we're not being true to ourselves and our beliefs, so we want to try to push forward with this idea. That philosophy, of course, is tempered by our desire to win. And in our desire to win, we've tried to balance both talking to grassroots activists as well as talking to the professional political consultants. And we've talked to a lot of the national consultants as well as in Washington State, across the board, very professionals from the Republican campaigns to the Democratic campaigns. We said, this is what we want to do. We've got all these great arguments on why we need to end marijuana prohibition, and they said, it sounds great. What's the data say? Well, why don't we need data? These arguments make sense, you know. There's the black market, there's crime, and there's corruption. We saw what happened during alcohol prohibition. They said, well, yeah, it makes sense, but do the Washington voters feel that way? So, reluctantly, we went down the path and said, okay, we'll do a poll. Because we felt good about our arguments, and we started out with the general question, how do you feel about tax and regulating marijuana like alcohol? And certainly people would see this, especially in Washington, where we just had last year an initiative that cut about $700 million from our state budget. Certainly they'll realize that this is revenue. They weren't convinced. And so when we came back, and there's a little bit, the money argument helped a little bit, but and the third argument we tried is, well, in alcohol prohibition, there was pushers in the school, and certainly, you know, if you're not regulating it, drug pushers aren't checking IDs, and if we regulate it, we'll reduce access to minors, and the studies say minors find it easier to find marijuana than alcohol anyway, and certainly that would be convincing. And That was actually, I think, the least convincing of our arguments. And in the end, after we gave them only positive arguments,